Good morning, members and guests. Let us reconvene the meeting of the Board of Equalization. Ms. Richmond, what is our first matter for this morning?
Good morning, Chairman and board members. Our first item on this morning's agenda is item C, Sales and Use Tax Appeals Hearings. Item C2, Wing Sang Inc. We're still waiting for them to sign in, so our first hearing will be...
Wow, it's an echo.
There's a little delay. So our first hearing this morning will be item C5, James Paul Flores and Lydia Pimentel Flores. Please come forward. Board Proceedings has received contribution disclosure forms for today's hearings from the parties, participants, and agents. All forms were properly completed and signed. All parties, participants, and agents are on the alpha listings provided to your office. Each person sitting at the table will be asked to introduce themselves and, if necessary, their affiliation with the taxpayer for the record. 10 minutes is allocated for the taxpayer's opening presentation, followed by 10 minutes for the department's presentation, and 5 minutes is allocated to the taxpayer for rebuttal. Mr. Horton?
Thank you very much. Mr. Angija, would you please introduce the issues in this case?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Jeff Angija on behalf of the Appeals Division. The appeal before you presents two unresolved issues, which are first, whether additional adjustments to the amount of unreported taxable sales are warranted, and second, whether there is clear and convincing evidence to support the assertion of a fraud penalty.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Board of Equalization. Once you're settled in, we'd ask that you introduce yourself for the record. And please be advised, we will return and allow you 5 minutes on rebuttal after you've had an opportunity to present your case.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Highnote. It's just like in music, Highnote. You need one of those buffers like the performers, I guess. Apologies. And I represent the Floreses for purposes of today's hearing. I'm also their Chapter 13 bankruptcy counsel.
My name is Lydia Flores, and I'm here to discuss our case.
My name is James Flores.
At your convenience, please.
Yes. With regards to the issues, I have 3 items I'd like to discuss, the first 2 of which are in regards to the issue number 1, which is whether any further adjustments need to be made. I've got 2 things I want to raise there. First, regarding this issue of missing Z tapes and the contention of the board that those do not accurately reflect the sales. The second issue would be whether this $715.72 for the test day is a good representative day upon which to base the entire tax due. My third issue then is in regards to the finding of fraud, and that's my primary reason for being here today as bankruptcy counsel, because of the obvious serious ramifications a fraud finding would have on the reorganization under their Chapter 13. With regards then to the first issue, the Z tapes. Now, I gave a rather big packet, but really I'm just brushing upon things rather quickly, except for one piece of paper in there. The first 2 pages are just simply photographs so we have a feel for this business. This business is located by the 32nd Street Naval Pier down south of San Diego. 95% of their customers are NASCO employees. They come there either hopefully after their shift, at least unless they're coming just for lunch, usually the big lunch crowd, and a little bit after their shift. The second picture shows the interior. We've got 4 tables, 5 stools, a pretty small place. Then I'm going to gloss over the next page and bring that up in my subsequent discussion. What I really wanted to focus on with this Z tapes is that big fold-out page. When I was already representing the Floreses in their Chapter 13 when they brought the decision of the board to me. And so I came at it kind of fresh, with a new perspective, hopefully. And I sat down with them to try to determine where are these 800 missing Z-tapes that are contended to be missing in this review. And so we went through what they did have, and that's what I've got some exemplars here. The pull-out sheet, the double-sided sheet is an example of 3 days of complete tapes. That needs to be contrasted with the remaining portion of this packet, which are cut-up tapes that show what was actually delivered to their tax counsel and subsequently delivered to the board. And it's the Flores' contention that the missing Z tapes were zeroed out, basically just running of those Z tapes by the employees between their shifts. And that's what this pull-out sheet tries to explain. And I can walk you through that to try and point out 3 sample days to show where this zeroing out occurred. The first column has to do with the 23rd of April. If we start at the top, we've got the clerk 1 entry, some register sales for Budweiser. Maybe that's an opinion on how much they like their Budweiser beer, I don't know. But after that, then, we have the Z1 reports from that Budweiser. And so we've got a financial report and what I call the items report. Then we get to the end of that shift. Then we look at what happens after that. We have a zeroed out Z1 financial, a zeroed one Z1 items report. Then we pick up with some more register sales. Similarly, then, for the next day, if we start at the top, we have some sales, a drawer open, a Z1 financial, some Z1 items, and then again, a zeroing out of the Z1 financial and a zeroing out of the Z1 inventory report, and then some more sales. Lastly, I think I'm repeating myself, but I thought 3 would be a nice sample. We've got sales, a Z1 financial reporting those sales, a Z1 item reporting the sales, and then we've got towards the bottom a zeroed out financial and zeroed out items with subsequent sales. So then it's our contention that those zeroed out reports were not provided by the Floreses to their attorney. I'm not saying that it was right to not to do so, but I'm trying to explain what this 800 item discrepancy is all about. When Ms. Flores prepared her Z1 reports to give to her tax counsel, you see the remainder go through a sample week, which includes the date in question that the test was run. Each day, there's either 2 or 3 shifts. It depends upon how busy it is. Everybody knows what the schedule is at the 32nd Street Shipyard, and they have either 2 or 3 shifts. And for each shift then, Ms. Flores put together the Z1 financial and the Z1 item reconciliation. And you see, for example, on the 16th, we've got 3 of those. On the 17th, we've got 2 of those. And onward, forward. I'm just using these to highlight their contentions. And the important part is, when you look at these, there's numbers missing between what was presented for each of these shifts by Ms. Flores. And so, me as their bankruptcy counsel, just trying to get down to the bottom of it, trying to say, well, where are these other reports if you say you gave them all to them? And they went back, they found a few complete backup register tapes that were run, and those are the ones that they presented to me from April. And so then I sat down and went through them and said, well, here's the ones that are missing. Why are they ringing in these zero amounts? And it was their contention that the people that worked at the restaurant would do that in between their shifts for 2 reasons. 1, so they could have an accurate bottle count, and 2, just for purposes of evaluation of how busy they were, their performance, and what was done on each shift. This business is normally open from about 10 to 4, 6 days a week, with some Sundays if they know something's going on. Either it's a Padres game or there's a special project being worked down there at the naval shipyard. And during those shifts, there's usually 3 employees. There's a cook, a waitress, and a bartender. And so when these are rung up, they're rung up at the end of the shift so that the employees have an accurate record that they can access of their bottle counts and of what they did for that shift. Am I saying that's right? No, I'm not. I'm just trying to offer what I discovered as their bankruptcy counsel when I read this and said, you contend you gave them all the reports, but there's 800 missing. What could that be? And so that's what we ran through, and that's our contention for this issue number 1. And that it wasn't an intentional concealment of those amounts, and given the nature of what was not produced, it wasn't, as was found by the board, some dereliction of some heightened duty that was placed upon them by the prior audit. It was simply an accommodation that they were doing that they weren't even under the understanding was even relevant. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 then is this test day. What I've got in response to that is page number 3, the one we passed over before that big pullout, is Mrs. Flores's breakdown of the month of March 2009 of what was sold. The tests day was run on March 20th, as we all know. And if you look at that, the dates on the amounts on there pretty much coincide with what you would consider the normal contention. That on the 20th, this was a Friday. NASCO employees are paid every Friday. That's the one day out of the week they have all their money in their pocket. And if you look at Fridays and Saturdays are 2 to 3 times as much higher than any other days of the week. Now, that's been argued before, but what I would like to say is, let's say it was something different. Let's say the Floreses were saying that NASCO employees got paid on a Monday, and that was their highest day of the week. You would say, that doesn't sound logical because most people at the end of their week's on a Friday, and when you have your money, when you go out to a restaurant or you stop for a drink, is when you're off work for the weekend and you stop by on your payday and you got your money. And so I'm using the same contention that would come back to them if they were trying to say something different. If they were saying, no, every day we do $752 worth of business on average. You'd say, well, based on your location and the people that are showing up, that does not sound intuitive. And so this is a record that was produced in 2009 that Ms. Flores had of her summaries. So first off, what I'm contending under this sales is that's not a typical day. That's one of their busiest days of the week. Secondly then, is we've got this issue with non-reported sales. And so I'm looking at it from the standpoint of somebody just looking at what happened on that sample day. We have Nora the bartender. That's the name of the bartender that was on that shift that the the representative was there. So we have Nora during happy hour not crediting $112 of happy hour drink sales. Kind of begs the question, in my mind, I can see her stuffing the $112 in her pocket. But there's no evidence of where the $112 went. Did it go in the register? Apparently, from the review, it didn't. Is there any evidence it went to the Floreses? No. The only evidence is that the person at the bar who had the $112 in her hand didn't put it in the cash register. And so our contention then is let's take a look at what this number, the 752, is composed of. It's composed of verified sales plus this $112 of non-reported happy hour income. All we have is Nora to look at for that. That's the only evidence we have of what was observed. And all of these numbers are based off of these days, so they deserve a little bit of scrutiny. So who was Nora? Nora was a part-time employee that worked there 2.5 years approximately. She worked 3 days a week when she'd show up. She would go down south to be with her family about a quarter of the year. During the holidays, she'd leave early and come back late. So Nora's there. She takes $112 and, for lack of a better phrase, puts it in her pocket or puts it somewhere. And that is, for one day, what they're basing then the theft of one bartender part-time on one shift who's there 3 days out of the 6 days a week that the place is open. And they're using that to base this higher number. Which then gets me to my last point of this, is then let's look at the higher number. That's why I had those pictures in there. We're looking at $750 for 7 days a week, when they're closed for the month of March. 3 of the 4 Sundays they were closed, which makes it almost $800, $900 a day. Run through 5 bar stools and 4 tables. That is an inordinate amount when you see what comes up normally, tortas and Badweiser. That's what's being sold here. These aren't your $15 or $13 giant margaritas. These are steelmen that come in and sit down and drink Budweisers and have sandwiches at lunch. And when you do the math off of what's rung up, $2 for a beer, $3 for a sandwich, the amount of people that would be going through this, they would have a line out the door back to the shipyard. It's just not of a size to warrant that degree of traffic. And the reason why I bring this up is that the decisions have no consideration of these facts, which to me as a bankruptcy attorney who has to get my arms around a business to figure out a plan of reorganization, is talking to them about. And so I got this information about their hours, their employees, their shifts, and then when this report came down, the numbers of $1 million over a little over 3.5 years, they'd have to be doing that $750 a day. That's truckloads of Budweiser. And that's not what any of these intuitive reasoning or any evidence found. There was no determination, well, does $750 make sense? There was a determination that Nora didn't put $112 in the cash register, and based off of that, we're going to bump it by that. We've got a 200+% multiple that we're going to apply because the Z1s are missing numbers in their sequence. And based off of that, we get to my third issue, which is the fraud.
Time's expired.
Can I give a close?
Sure.
Because really all that is I'm just summarizing those two things. Is for fraud, there has to be some intentional act by the Floreses. There's no evidence that that money was being funneled to the Floreses. The only thing that's being reported is the last person that had it in their hand was Nora. Secondly, the missing receipts, we have found a plausible explanation for that at least at this point, has never even come up before. And that was part of my reason for coming up here, because that's the way, when I put it together, it came out. And I'm just kind of shocked that at this point, none of that's voiced in this, that we considered it and rejected it. And that's important for the fraud issue, because you have to find that they did something intentional or that they breached a duty of this heightened scrutiny that has been imposed on them by their prior audit. And I say based off of those issues, there's not sufficient finding for fraud. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We will now go to the department. Department, be advised that they have 10 minutes. We've asked that you commence with your introduction as well. We will allow you, if necessary, an opportunity to provide a closing statement.
Good morning, Chairman Horton and members. My name is Scott Lambert, and I'll be representing the Sales and Use Tax Department today. To my right is Kevin Hanks, also with the Sales and Use Tax Department, and to Mr. Hanks' right is Stephen Smith with the Legal Department. In this particular case, we're talking about a beer bar that also sells food during a certain period of time. Only cash is accepted at this particular establishment, and that's something important to remember. Not our contention is, the department's contention is, not all the cash was deposited into the bank. So, what led the department to initiate observations? Upon review of the taxpayers' records, the taxpayer showed a overall recorded markup of 20%. There was a previous audit, which happened to be a fraud audit, that indicated the markup was well over 200%. So that was an issue or a flag to the department that there was a problem there. Also, when we started the audit, the taxpayer said they only had Z-tapes, sporadic Z-tapes, and monthly reports for 2 quarters. We were told that the other records were disposed. So what we did is we asked the taxpayer to provide us or to keep records for a 2-week period of time in order for us to establish the liability. And what we were trying to do was to use the bar purchases or the bar sales by marking them up to establish what the food sales were. So during that 2-week period of time, we're trying to get a ratio between the food to beer sales for us to establish a liability in that manner. And I'll just step back. That's what we did in the prior audit. And the taxpayer, upon getting that information, they did not provide us with the records in the first audit either. They then provided us with the sales records for the first audit period. So when we did the markup in the first audit, after we were done with that and we said what the liability was, which was substantial, they actually came back and said, oh, no, we have the records, here's the records, and the liability was a little bit smaller based on what they had rung up through their records. But what that showed was, and this is their records, what went through their records, or went through their register, is that their sales were $1,082 a day. In the DNR, it gives you a different number. The department said it was 726. I've established how the department said that. What they did is they assumed the taxpayer was open 7 days a week. They took the sales figure, divided it by the number of days in the audit, and that's how we came up with 726. In the supplemental DNR, the conference holder divided it by 6 days a week, and they took the gross figure for that audit and came up with $852. That wasn't correct. They were only open 5 days a week in the prior audit, and so when you divide that number into what the revised recommendation was, there's no question it comes out to $1,082. And that's key to this, because the argument's being made that this location is so small that it can't make that many sales through there. And so by their own records, back in 2001, they've established that not only can they make the $700, but they can make more than that. It was substantially more than that, and I'll get into that. So in this audit period, we asked the taxpayer to provide us with 2 weeks of records. It came back where we couldn't rely upon it. We could only rely upon one day, which happened to be a Friday. We also observed during that day 2 hours of the happy hour sales of $112, and that were not being rung through the register, and we added that number back to what went through the register. We were not there during the rest of the period of time when they were ringing sales through the register on March 20th, 2009. What you'll see from the tapes is the first sale that shows up is 12:11 p.m. So they normally open at 9 o'clock. There's no sales that are being rung through that register until past noon. So I would contest that The sales are, in fact, not all rung up for that particular days, not only the happy hours, but the sales before that. But our result comes out to, it wasn't the $750, it was $715, and there was tax included in that, and when that's subtracted out, our average sales is $701 for that particular test day. And that was March 20th, 2009, and that was basically at the heart of the, the start of the recession, and businesses were having problems at that particular time. So what we're doing now is we're using the sales from that particular day to go back to the early parts. We're going back to July of 2005 to use depressed sales to establish what the liability is. And my argument is not we should increase the liability, although I believe an argument can be made that the sales would be at least what they were in 2001 when we did the audit of $1,082. What I would say is that $701 sale is more than reasonable for the audit period. And what I would say is probably for the year of 2009, it probably does represent that particular, that year. The after the appeals conference, the taxpayer provides us with the records. They've come up with the cash register tapes now, and what they're saying is that, okay, we underreported $50-something thousand. So if you take a look at that and say, okay, we're going to accept the cash register tapes that the taxpayer is providing, and you take that $50,000 and you add it into the equation, you're still well less than 100% markup. You're going to be less than a 50% markup using their own figures. And that's why our argument is, even if they provide us with those tapes cannot be representative of the sales that were truly made through that particular business. And if you take a look at their Z-tapes, what they reported was $234 a day. Their Z-tape showed $270 a day. Our observation test was $701 a day, and the prior audit was $1,082. So you can see 234, they absolutely knew that that was not a proper amount. The other thing that should be noted is, after the first fraud audit, the taxpayer substantially increased what they reported for a period of time, and then that number dropped back down over a short period of time. So they only reported a higher figure for a short period of time. In regards to the fraud, the taxpayer said they threw away the records. Later, they provided us with records. I'm not sure when those were prepared, but they were not provided at the time of the initial audit. That's what caused us to do the observation test. The taxpayer knew that $234 a day was nowhere near what they sell through here. And I'd also point out the taxpayer on their menu notes that they have catering and delivery services. So the fact that not everybody is eating here, there's quite a few that are getting it and eating it outside of this restaurant. So, so the taxpayer had the knowledge and the intent to underreport the tax, and that's why the fraud penalty is being put on the audit. The fact that they went through a prior audit, let alone a negligent or a fraud penalty was applied, put the taxpayer on notice that they were supposed to maintain records, and in fact, they were maintaining the records during the prior audit period when they provided it to us. It's not until now that they've provided us records that are not consistent with the sales that are being made through this particular business. So, to summarize, based on the markup, the 20% markup, the fact that there are missing Z-register tapes, and in fact, even if you say that there weren't any missing Z tapes. But they can't be accurate because there's less than a 50% markup. This is a beer bar. You know how much you sell for a bottle of beer, and that's most of it is either bottled or canned beer. There's very few draft sales, so it's easy to calculate what the markup is. And the fact that they had $1,082 a day during the prior audit period based on their own records means that we cannot accept the Z tapes that they're providing now that they're continuing are their actual sales. So for that reason, the department concurs with the Appeals Division decision and recommendation.
Thank you. On rebuttal, please.
I'll be very brief because I know I went over before.
No, it's not necessary.
First off, I don't have before me anything of the prior audit, but if restaurants always did the same amount of business for a period envisioned by these two audits, I'd be out of business because they had to close up the business because of the recession and also because of the declines in the naval shipyard, which predated the recession. Everybody talks about general economy. It's the economy right there in that shipyard. It's whether they have contracts or not. That comes and goes. That's a roller coaster. The general rule that we read in the news is recession, no recession. But it is very dependent upon how many ships are being built, how many ships are in port, as to whether there's going to be people even in the restaurant that day. So basing it that far back seems to ignore the location of where they're at. With regards to the dollar amounts, again, here's a week right here, and yet they're basing it off of a day. I'm at a loss to figure why it's necessary to throw out everything except one day and to say, well, there's tapes missing, so we're going to wash our hands of anything that was presented. And then we're going to look back 5 years before that and say that we're going to use this instead with no even review. It's just a total, we've refused to review it with what was presented. The disparity they found between what was the 240 versus 251, that doesn't sound like anything that would allege intentional misrepresentation. That sounds like it could simply be errors in computation, as compared to where they're trying to twist that into 1,082 a day from now almost well over 10 years ago. So the point of what I'm getting at is there's a big word in that finding of fraud. There has to be evidence. Not evidence from what happened before. That was already ruled upon, but evidence as to what's happening now. And I tried, at least in the limited ability I could as their bankruptcy counsel, to at least try to get to the bottom of what happened. That's why I'm here to present today what I've found. And based off of that, we feel that the date and the employee upon which they based this non-reported income was a mere fraction of what was there, a mere fraction of the time, less than a third of the time that they had otherwise had a bartender there. And there's no evidence of any, say, we considered the evidence that was presented by the Floreses, but we don't consider it for these reasons. There's really nothing there. There's no interview as to, was there any theft problems with Nora? What was going on with her in this non-reported? Was there any interview of the Floreses? Did you instruct Nora to withhold that? And did you divvy it up at the end of the day? What happened to the $112? There's none of that. And so I'm simply arguing that instead of using math, fraud has to find evidence. And there's no evidence before the board at this point to make a finding of fraud by the way the board did it themselves. 1 day review and a lot of math.
Thank you. Discussion members, Harkey.
I'll start and then I'll reserve the right to come back again. Catering and delivering services, do you have those?
No. We tried, but it didn't work.
When did you try?
Back on 8, I think.
And when is this
2008.
audit period?
This audit period goes back to July of 2005 to December of 2009.
Okay, so it would have been during that period. So you did have some catering. Okay, and you discontinued it. Do you have any other seating areas outside of?
No.
Okay, when we Google, we see a back patio with seating and tables in the back. Do you have
That's
a back
for the
patio?
smoking area, for the guys to smoke and drink their beer.
Okay, so you do have other tables. Thank you. For the department, can you go over again why it would not behoove you to look at these tapes? And remember, I've never done an audit, and I don't know what a Z-tape is supposed to show versus what these showed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Typically, what happens at a business is you'll have a cash register, and that you ring the sales into that register, and then at the end of the day, you'll what's called ringing out the register, and you're basically called Z out. It's a key that you hit, and it just shows all the sales for the entire day.
Okay.
So what you can also do, most of these registers have, is what's called an X tape. And so instead of Zing out for the day, you would just X out for the day or for a period of time, and what it would normally tell you is what the sales were during that period of time. That doesn't appear to what have happened in this particular case. What it looks like is sporadically the taxpayer throughout the day, and I think there was a method to it, but they would ring the register out or Z out at different times of the day. So maybe after the happy hour shift or after the food sales that were, from a period of time, 10 to 2 o'clock, that they would have the
And
food.
what would be the benefit of doing that?
Well, sometimes if you have like a change in shift where you have, what you'd want to do is find out how much cash is in the register and tie it out to the sales that you made to make sure that that the money's in there. So in other words, if a different cashier came in and you didn't do that, and then say a number of cashiers ran through that and you rang out, then you wouldn't know if it doesn't add up, you don't know where the problem came from, right? Was it somebody
Right.
making a mistake with handing back the cash, or is it somebody putting cash in their pocket? So you want to be able to identify the cashier that the problem is with for whatever reason, right? Because it can be not just stealing, it could just be a mistake. They gave you a
Right.
20 or they gave you a 10, you thought it was a 20. And so that's the reason for doing that. So what it also will show on there is it'll show a number. When you Z out, the cash register will give you a number on that particular tape. So you can tell in the series of tapes, if you rung out, there would be a number on it, and then you would see what the next number is. And, if it doesn't show up, there's something missing, you don't know what went through that register. It could have been sales, it could have been just they Z'd it out, they threw it away. You don't know exactly what the problem is with those tapes when you're doing it that way. When you have those missing tapes, it's difficult to use those tapes necessarily to establish a liability because the information's missing.
Right, it's supposed to be sequential is what you're saying.
That's right. The numbers that come off that machine are sequential.
Okay, for the taxpayer, why would you have had missing Z-tapes?
Why?
Yes, why were the tapes missing? You've been through an audit before, you've been through a couple audits before.
I think
and
I think the response is simply because those Z-tapes contain no information. They were these zeroed out that were done between the shifts. So these ones that were run between the shifts, what council was saying was that you would run a Z-tape total at the end of each shift. But what was done here that was different was that Z-tape total was run. But then before the next shift came in, or when the next shift came in, they ran it again to be sure that there was nothing still left in there. And so you have a number like number 1 when you ran your Z-tape at the end of the shift. Then when the next shift comes in, they zero it out using Z it out as opposed to, I guess, Xing it out. There's those 2 zeros that come up with a sequential number to each of them, and then we start back in with the next Z-tape that does the cashier receipts of that second shift. And so I want to highlight that difference, that those are the 2 tapes that are out of series on these tapes that are being reported. And why weren't they presented? Because they had nothing on them. That they were simply these zeroed out, and what I provided you is exactly what was provided to their counsel. Their hand-scribbled notes and the Z-tapes, because there's 2 different types with 2 different series of numbers for the goods and for the financials. And so that was what was provided to counsel. Not that it was right to do what they did, but it answers the question as to what was going on here, as opposed to them ringing up an extra $200 a day or $500 a day and tearing up those receipts. This was a common practice that they were doing at the time that they thought was harmless.
Okay, well, I would agree if they hadn't just been through an audit for fraud for the same thing. So I guess that's why I'm asking, why weren't these things retained? And I'm not hearing a real good reason as to why they weren't retained. Also, you seem to have been able to exhume some since the audit.
That's right. I asked them to get a hold of counsel, get back what happened around this March day so I could figure out what was going on in my mind at the time of this, because this ultimately has a bearing to bear on their bankruptcy. And so this is what they were able to scrape up. A few tape rolls and these around that time to show, to at least give me the information that I needed to try to figure out what was happening. Did I go and do my own investigation with their former counsel and go through everything? I did not. And this is what they did. They brought to me to try to help me understand what was going on.
The next point I want to bring up is the 20% markup for a restaurant. What do you mean?
That, I don't think that that math has ever been explained to the comprehension of the Floreses.
Okay,
And
let
so
me
that's-
let me have the department explain it for all of us here now then.
Okay. Let me just,
Take your
give me a
time.
second to turn to the. All right. How we arrived at that number, what we did is we took the income tax returns for the years 2005, 2006, and 2007. We took the gross receipts from those returns, compared them to the cost of goods sold that they claimed on their income tax returns. The net result was the gross profit. We took the gross profit, divided it into the cost of goods sold. For those 3 years combined, there is a 20% markup. By year, I believe it goes for the first year is a 4% markup, a 13% markup, and then a 43% markup respectively by year. So that is how we arrived at the markup of record.
Okay, so the markup is from your income tax returns, the 20%. That's what you reported on income tax. There are a variety of things that probably go through income tax to beef up the cost of goods sold, which are legitimate. But you know, without having all of the sales tax, which you're reporting for sales tax, would generally 20% is just, I don't think you could keep the doors open, even with no mortgage. I don't understand how you could survive on that. But so I may come back. I just started the questioning. I may come back because I have to review what I've heard today. Thank you.
Member Ma.
To the Floreses, to the Floreses, hello? To the Floreses. What was your hours of operation?
From 10 in the morning till about 9 or 10 at night,
Okay.
depending on if there was people.
I'm just trying to follow the Z tapes to see whether the times were right. Did you check to see whether the cash register time is correct?
I think so.
Member Runner.
Yeah, let me just, let me go to the department. There was an attempt to try to do or ask for records over a 2-week period,
Correct.
right?
That's correct.
And those were not provided?
They were provided, and they were found to be not complete. There were missing guest checks, and therefore, the only day that they felt was complete was the March 20th of 2009 date.
Oh, I guess they the second time.
So this, okay, maybe the 20th, then I thought, that was not our observation test?
It was a combination of our observation test during the happy hour, and then the rest of it was their records.
Was their records?
It was not our observation. So when you say observation test, it's somewhat, I guess, misleading in that it was basically their records for that particular day, plus the 2 hours during the happy hour that we say the sales were not rung up during that
And we
period of time.
chose that day because?
We felt that day was more complete than the other days.
What was the span of period that we were doing the 2 weeks? From what date to what date?
I believe it,
March 8th, 2009 through March
8th.
21st.
right,
March 8th through what? The 21st?
Through March 21st.
right. They were open 6 days a week during that
Mhm.
time period.
And then the other days we chose not to look at those other dates because we felt that the guest checks were incomplete.
We looked at them and made the decision that they were incomplete.
And the basis for them being incomplete was,
There were missing guest checks that couldn't be accounted
I mean,
for.
in terms of the order,
Yes,
in terms of a sequential order of guest checks, you were missing item number 4 through 7 or whatever.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask the taxpayers, why would you have missing sequential guest checks?
We didn't. It's because what you explained.
This is not the Z tape
not-
anymore.
Maybe perhaps if could be explained what they mean by the guest checks?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that'd be good, because I'm thinking a book of guest checks, that you have
Write
numbers
down
on
the
them, and you write them
orders
down,
and-
and you write down the order, and then they're in a pad. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of a guest check. So if it's different than that, or what you have, let me know. Yes, tell me.
Well, I guess my question's directed to the board because
Yeah, go ahead.
she doesn't understand is, so what were these guest checks that you were saying you were relying upon to verify the
Well, here,
bond?
you can talk to me. Okay. So what you don't understand what guest checks they are talking about that were out of sequence?
You mean the C tapes?
I don't think we're
No.
talking about Z tapes anymore. We're talking about when somebody, I think, let's see if I'm not in the
They're
business. But we're talking about when somebody goes and you take an order, you write down the order on a check, and then you rip it off and you turn it into the cook or something. Then that has a number on it. And apparently what you provided is these for those days.
Mhm.
And in that process, there were some that were missing
No,
in sequence.
no, we didn't.
Now,
We
you gotta
didn't
talk,
give
I don't know what you mean there.
No, we didn't give any of those guest checks to nobody.
You mean you didn't use them?
No, we didn't use them because we'll ask for one burrito or a couple of enchiladas, So we didn't make a
You don't
guest
have
check.
a guest check
No.
process.
No.
Somebody just writes down on a piece of paper 3 burritos,
Right.
a taco, and a Bad Light or whatever
Right.
those were. Right? Is that what
Or
you're
on
telling me?
their hand.
Yeah, you don't have, or on their hand, okay. So let me go back to the department. Okay, when we say we were missing guest checks, what is that? What were we?
They had guest checks that my understanding is they had guest checks that were written up during that period of time. There's comments in here that says that's what they do is they take the guest checks.
Whose comments are those?
Those are the auditor's comments.
Not the taxpayers.
I believe the taxpayer told us it's not in writing, it's the writing of the auditor. And they
Yeah, I'm in
say.
a bit of a dilemma now because I'm trying to walk through this, and if our argument is based on missing guest checks, and they're telling us they don't use guest checks,
No, because
and so I'm trying to figure out then how we
Well,
discounted
we
these
can-
days.
Okay, well, you can go to the ticket number that's on the cash register as well. And if you take a look at the ticket number that's on there, there are a number of missing ticket numbers that are on the register tape for
Ticket,
those
okay, so the
days.
ticket numbers, okay, so during the same period of time, as they provided then tapes from the cash register,
Right.
they were missing sequential ticket numbers?
Well, when the ticket number ran up on the machine, it shows a ticket number.
Right.
That it would be if you printed out a receipt, that it would be that ticket number, so you could identify that.
Right, yeah.
And
Like call
from
your
the
number and
register
you-
tape, it has a number, and there's nothing that correlates with it. So you don't know if it was a sale or it wasn't, or what happened at that particular time. But there's a number of times the register is open and there's no sale that's associated with that.
But we felt that the 20th had the best.
That's correct.
Let me ask again, according to what there's now, okay, if they don't go to the guest check process, then they're saying you have these tickets that are not the tickets, but the, on the register, there's some sequential numbering of receipts that are coming out of the register, and somewhere those were missing.
My only contention, unless you can clarify, is there's nothing of that in this decision as to why all they talk about are Z-tapes in the decision. There's 800 missing, and they base a 230% markup off of that. And so, I guess fair is fair. I brought in this theory that I discovered in the course of my representation, but now we're hearing this about.
You'd never heard about this guest check before issue?
because if a person comes in to ask us for a beer, we're not going to make a ticket.
Okay, let me ask you this. Your restaurant itself, who actually manages the restaurant?
Myself,
So are you there during those hours?
I'm there in the lunch hour, yes.
During the lunch hour?
Yes.
So you're there in the beginning of the day and then,
Yes. Uh-huh.
so you're there during that particular time?
Yes.
So this idea of changing shifts and zeroing out the Z-tape, is that a process to which you were aware of that was going on? And is that a process to which was the normal process for how your business operated?
Yes, we had to clear the machine in order for the other person to start her shift.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Stower?
Yes, I think I understand the petitioner saying that some of the beverage sales was not replaced into the cash register, basically indicating that there may have been some type of employee theft. Did I understand you to say that?
That's what the Flores has understood this
Okay.
review of that day to find. And when they found, and when that was presented to them, Norma was fired.
Okay.
Because it makes it look like, to me and to them, that Norma put $112 in her pocket during that happy hour.
Okay, great. That's what I want to make sure I understood that. To the department, if that did take place, how does that affect your calculation? Or does it affect your calculation?
Okay, well, what we did is, or what we were looking for were the average daily sales. So whatever happened to that particular money is out of the equation at this particular time, although I will address that. All we were trying to do is figure out what the average sales were per day. And actually, during that time, we were trying to figure out something else. We were trying to do a different audit approach, but because we didn't have the records, we couldn't do it. And so ultimately, that's what we ended up with, is trying to get an average daily sales. Now, as far as the taxpayer making this, or I'm sorry, the sale being made, that $112 being sale, that is a sale that's made, that the taxpayer is responsible for those sales because their agent made those sales. Now, it hasn't been proven that that money wasn't received by the taxpayer, but whether or not it was, the taxpayer would still be responsible for those sales. And what I would point out is that we still believe the $701 for that day is more than representative for the audit period.
One more question to the department, because I'm still a little unclear. So you guys had asked for records for March 8th through March 21st.
That's correct.
And they, according to the department, they didn't present the complete record. So you only used the March 20th date.
That's correct.
But you obviously had already done the observation test for the March 20th.
Right.
What?
So you did the observation test, and then when you went to run your numbers, you just focused on the 20th only. Was there any?
Well, we looked at the other days, and we used the one day of March 20th.
When did the department realize that the other days were incomplete?
I believe when they gave us the records, we did not have the records at March 20th. I believe it was March 23rd when we asked the taxpayer to provide us with the records for the 2-week test.
I understand. Was there any consideration of doing a second observation day following the 20th?
There wasn't any, well, there were comments that were made after the audit was submitted. I'm unable to ask the auditor. They're no longer with the board. There isn't comments. He did not write comments in the audit as to why he didn't go out and do a complete day's observation test. At the time that the reported discussion was written up, the taxpayer's license, ABC license, had been revoked, and that they didn't feel that a subsequent test after that would have been representative of the taxpayer's sale. And the revocation of the ABC license took place in the early part of, or January of 2010. So.
Another thing that you said was that you felt like the cash register tapes wasn't rung up until after 12 p.m., but the business had been open since 10 a.m.?
That's correct.
So that's a 2-hour difference. Are you thinking they were selling breakfast items during that time? Or, I know you can't sell beer at 10 a.m.
Yeah, you
I think,
Can you?
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Correction.
Yeah.
Clearly, somebody's not ordering beer.
Well, I think they
Okay,
can.
correction.
But I know you.
I don't know the exact time, but I think it's six in the morning if I'm not, because
okay.
sometimes what happens is, people are on different schedules. So what you
Oh.
think is like 6 in the morning drinking, it's other people are getting off shift
Off shift.
and they're starting their night.
Okay, I understand.
Haven't you been in a casino?
No.
Oh, we'll go through for breakfast one time.
Okay, thank you. I won't go further on that line of question now that I've been to the petitioner. You guys would like to say
Okay,
something,
we have
please?
successfully.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify with Ms. Flores is they don't serve breakfast. The usual people come in during the noon hours when they first show up, and they start getting busy about 1 p.m.
Okay, all right, thank
Is
you.
that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no questions for me. No more further questions.
Member Ma.
Okay, so I have a question about, so your operations, when people come in, you just put everything into the cash register?
Yes.
right? And the cash register generates these type of receipts.
Yes.
And that's what you use to reconcile.
Yes.
So, you know, when I'm going through like sequentially what you submitted, I see numbers missing, even though it's the same date, it's the same time, it's a Z1 report, and I'll just give you an example. Let's go to the sheet.
I can answer that. I had the same problem when I
Okay.
first reviewed.
Okay.
There's two types of Z1s. There's the financial Z1, and that has one series of numbers. And then there is the item reconciliation Z1, and that has a different number. And they were pretty close for some of those. They're like 4 numbers off. So maybe somebody tapped one twice of one column as opposed to one of the other columns, but you have to compare those 2 number series separately for that day. You don't look at the Z1 of the financial and compare its number against the Z1 of the items. It won't work. They have 2 series that they run.
Right. But I'm saying that if we were going to go, if I was an auditor, right, I'm looking at the numbers and I'm going 870 is one, and then 874 is another one. Where is 871, 72, 73 in between the 2 Z tapes that were printed or timed at the same time?
Again, when you look at the same time is when they run both series at the same time, but those series are going to generate numbers that have no relation to the other set of numbers. It's only when you compare the next shift when it comes in, and you compare the item reconciliation. They're not running at the same time. It's run 4 hours later, 6 hours later. So when you compare these 2 put together, those numbers have no relationship because one's a financial and one's an item reconciliation. You have to compare the next page, which is why this thing's so darn thick, to see that then you've got an item reconciliation that's 889 and here's an 891 because 890's missing, and it's based on them zeroing out this Z-tape before the shift.
Or maybe it's not there.
Well, the evidence is that's the procedure that they used, and that's why, at least that's their position, is that's why those weren't produced, because they were simply used to zero out.
Well,
And-
because, I mean, like, if I'm going through your receipts, even, like, in one day, like, I see gaps. Like, I see gaps of, like, 3 numbers. And, you know, if the auditor is trying to audit based on numbers and there's 3 numbers missing in between each Z report, then that's why they probably came up with the 800 that are missing. But it seems like this is the way the cash register generates the numbers and the system, right?
Right.
So to the department, did the auditor, I mean, it seems like the Z tapes are the final report per shift. Wouldn't the auditor look at the Z tapes then for each end of shift versus trying to go sequentially and look for each number? Because it appears that they don't go in order, they skip 3 or 4 each time
Right.
in between. So I'm just wondering,
Well, what I'll point out is when the auditor did this audit, these the tapes were not provided. They were provided at the time of the appeals conference. So the audit was completed, other than the first and second quarter of 2007, which they did provide us that. But other than that, they did not provide us with the other information. That was provided much later. And then we took a look at it. And I think when you do the analysis and you look at this, what they reported was $234 a day in sales, and they want based on their Z tapes, they say $270 a day. They're open for 12 hours a day. They're basically saying we only make $20 a day in sales, which doesn't appear reasonable. But even if you go past that and say, okay, we'll believe your Z tapes, that it has all the sales, and it's $270 a day. When you take a look at the markup, the audited markup doing that with those Z tapes, the markup is still less than 50%. So you know we know with a bottle of beer that you're selling for $2 or $3 for a bottle, and it's costing you less than $1 for the bottle, that the markup is going to be over 200%. We did that markup in the first audit for the beer, and the beer itself came up to 209% markup on that beer. The food is generally higher than that. So when they say I have a markup of less than 50%, the evidence would show that that doesn't make sense. There has to be sales that are either not being rung up on the register, or we're not getting all the cash register tapes that the sales are on. It's one of those two things that the evidence points that way.
So if you're selling a bottle of beer for Budweiser for $2, what's the cost of Budweiser?
3. Oh, excuse me. My apologies.
What was the case of beer? $17 to $18 a case. Case, 24 bottles.
Okay, so 75 cents. something like that.
And how much is it per case?
17, 18.
17?
$17 to $18, depending.
Less than $1.
What the price was, because it kept going up and up.
Okay.
75 cents.
So is that how you guys did the markup? Like
We-
for Budweiser,
We took them all. And that
for
was
Modelo? I mean, I kind of see what they're
right.
selling here.
Yeah, Corona, and I mean, they'll sell the imports, or,
Okay.
imports. They sell the imports for more. That's generally $3 for a bottle of beer. And so we did the markup in the prior audit because that's how we were going to do, or in fact, that's how we originally did the prior audit. And the markup for beer in the prior audit was 209%, which is, that is a fairly average markup for either bottled or canned beer.
And then how many bottles did you
We took
assume
a-
was sold if you don't have any?
Well, we did this in the
information?
prior audit, not on this particular audit. That's how we did the 209. So what we did is, we had their purchases in the prior audit, and we were able to establish a liability in that manner. And so, and what I was saying is that's how we did it originally. Once the taxpayer found out what the liability was, it was substantial, that they actually provided their actual records, which we accepted. And that's where we determined from those actual records that their daily sales were $1,082 during that time period. And that's just, we accepted their own figures for that time period.
So to the taxpayer, that's not what she wrote in terms of sales, that they're not making $1,000 a day.
No, but also she didn't write 240. If you look on that page for the March of what
Yep.
she wrote down, maybe 2 days a week were under $300, but there were days that were busier. There were $500, $600 days. Their most expensive day for the entire month was one $800 day. That is considerably more than $240. If you take the average of this month, it is much more than $240 that they were reporting. So that's where I get at the math problem. I don't see how you take this and then get to 240 a day. As far as the markup, I'm hesitant to even consider that at this point, given the situation with what was viewed and what's being compared. So I'm hard pressed without their tax individual here on their income tax side to figure out if it's really reporting a 20% markup. I'm simply providing the answer to the question as to why were these missing? And when you do the math based off of with that, it bears a substantial relationship to what was paid, as opposed to this markup theory that you use to bolster a 2 or 3 hour investigation that was performed during happy hour that you use to base all your math upon.
So did the Floreses, did you give them all of these receipts, these tapes from the register?
Yes,
You did give it to them?
yes.
And to the department, did you guys look at these or not?
I can't, I can say we took a look at all the register tapes that they provided us. Now, as far as these particular ones, I don't know whether we looked at them or not. My point would be, I don't believe it would change anything just from the fact of the numbers that we're looking at. So.
Ms. Mall, if I could add just one other comment too. One of the things that the department typically does is look at audited taxable sales, and then they compare that with cost of goods sold that the taxpayer has claimed on their federal income tax return to see what the audited markup would have been with our numbers. Gives us some reasonable understanding about whether or not our numbers are reasonable. So when we do that calculation, what we find is that there's an overall markup of 238%. I believe that's the overall markup, which is right in line with what we'd expect to see with the sales of the beer that have already been described. So it indicates to us that the numbers that we've generated are reasonable based on the costs and based on their purchases and then sales of the merchandise.
But not necessarily looking at their cash register tapes.
Correct.
Mr. Renner?
Yeah, just real quick, Mrs. Flores, you basically said you manage the restaurant?
Yes.
Any other
It's
family members?
managed, it's been closed since March.
Okay, you had managed, right. Any other family members engaged with your restaurant?
My daughter.
Your daughter? The only one? Okay.
Yes.
Let me just ask, I think clearly there's some missing records, some issues here, how the records were kept, an unfortunate history, obviously, already with the BOE. But I'll tell you what I am perplexed about is the observation. Oftentimes we talk about the need, and I think our manuals even talk about a 2-day observation. Am I to now understand that we didn't even do a full 1-day observation here?
We did not. And what we asked them for, and which is fairly typical in a lot of circumstances, we asked the taxpayer to maintain the records during a period of time. And
Right.
what we'll do is we'll kind of come in unannounced to make sure that they're recording all the sales that they should be recording during that time or period of time. And we tell the taxpayers before that is, we may have somebody checking just to make sure everything that's written up. So we wanted to do that for a 2-week period of time. They didn't keep the appropriate records for us to do that. I think in hindsight, I believe they should have done a 2-day test. I also believe that even if they had done the 2-day test, because of what had happened in terms of sales and they decreased, that you could have a representative sales for that 2009 period, but you're never going to really have representative sales that took place between July of 2005 and say the end of 2008,
Right.
because you just can't you can't get there from this. But if your criticism of the department is, we gave them the opportunity, they didn't take it, should we have went out there and do the 2-day test? I could say.
I'm just actually trying to even find where we even delineate the fact it was. I keep saying it. I keep seeing in the materials, an observation test, an observation test, an observation test. I never, till I just got here today, I never saw that it wasn't even a full observation test.
Right. Well, it's right. But in that particular case, what I would say, it's to the taxpayers, generally a taxpayer's benefit
To
do their own test.
Right.
I mean-
I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
I just concerned that what it appeared to, in terms of the record, to say an observation test, when indeed we probably didn't really do a full observation test.
Right. It's like, well, we called it, do a 2-week observation test for us, but that's probably not the proper term. It's
Yeah.
probably just keep your actual records for 2 weeks is really what we were which they should have been doing all along anyway.
Right, but I thought we do the observation test to verify records.
Generally, we do.
I mean, it's a different method, right? I mean, we have records. And
absolutely.
And the observation record, the reason we do an observation is because of the lack of records in order to see what our numbers show based upon what we observe.
Absolutely, because if
So
we're
we
just,
didn't do that here.
We did not. We accepted their records for that particular
Okay.
time. But you're absolutely right. That's a risk that the department takes when they ask the taxpayers to maintain the records. And that's why we try to, check in just to make sure that everything's rung up,
Yeah.
maybe, and, just to say, okay, and sometimes we find, we
Yeah,
wouldn't.
because the record for us, for me at least, would have been a lot more helpful if in 2 of these days, there was a full 2-day observation test. There was based upon the restaurant average menu prices, the number of people coming in and out of the restaurant,
Right.
all that. That would have been at least another set of information
Absolutely.
at
Yeah.
that point that would have been helpful.
Right.
Thank you.
Member Harkey.
To the department, I believe the reason that you requested their records is because when the auditor first went in, they had none.
They told us they had some, they had them for 2 quarters, but you're right. The reason we asked them to keep it is because they did not give us the records during the majority of the audit period.
Okay, so the department, I actually asked them to please retain the next 2 weeks.
That is correct.
We will use those as a guidepost. And
Yes.
then the department did come down just to observe 1 day of that 2 weeks.
Yes.
Observe 1 day, 3 hours, and they found at that time that things were not being run up appropriately, rang up
That's-
appropriately,
that's
even
correct.
in that 3-hour time period,
Correct.
when you've got an auditor sitting there.
Right, right. Which makes it somewhat unusual, because normally, though, and I'm not a real expert on people that take money, but I've done or been involved with a lot of audits. Generally, what they do is they take 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10, and there's different ways of, keeping track of it. So, even the old days, they would take toothpicks, and they would put it in for how many sales that they didn't ring up, so they know how much money to take out of the drawer at the end of the day. They keep that. There's all kinds of different ways for people
Yeah,
to do it, but they
well,
normally don't not ring up every sale during a period of time because it becomes obvious that.
Right, and the explanation for the happy hour is that they don't bring up their sales at the happy hour. They don't bring up their beer sales.
And they had
They record the sales by counting bottles at the end of the day in a sales journal.
That is correct. And
Right,
and
and
they-
so I think the department kind of offered them a little extra bone, so to speak, by saying, keep 2 weeks of records and just do it honestly, and then
saying
we'll
that you're
use those.
Correct.
And so the fact they didn't go sit there all day, they were gonna use their records anyway.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
In the DNR, it indicates that sales tickets were provided for the month of March. Is that true?
I believe it is. The comment that I was referring to earlier in the verification comments, and this is written in this audit and both the previous audit, it says taxpayer claims that daily meal tickets and register receipts are reviewed and compared to the daily summary Z tapes. So there are meal tickets that are prepared, and now when somebody comes and gets a bottle of beer, that's just rung up. There's nothing it's just rung up on the register. But as far as getting the meal, they call them guest checks, meal tickets, whatever you want to call it, but they're numbered, and the taxpayer had them, and that's my understanding is that those were provided to us during that period of time.
Once the auditor had impeached sales for a number of reasons, lack of records, low markup, so forth, how many hours did they do the observation test?
I believe it was two hours.
And how did they compute the $715?
Well, what they did is they took the sales off the register tape, and I believe it was $602 or $3, and then they added the.
For the 2 hours or for the entire
No, for the
day?
entire, what was on that register for that entire day was
Okay.
600, it was either $602 and something cents. And then they added the $112 from adding up the bottles that they would sell the bottles during happy hours. They would add those up, and that came to 112. So the two were added together, and that's how they came with the 715. But $14 of that was sales tax, and so the true sales was only $701.
In the prior audit, you indicated that the taxpayer, an audit was conducted, a liability was established, no records were provided in establishing the liability, and then subsequent to that, the taxpayer brought forth records?
That's correct.
What
There
type-
were
what-
some records that were provided in the first audit. There weren't necessarily
Additional.
sales records, but there were some records that were provided. But it wasn't, we had to establish the liability through the markup
Do you know
method.
what type of records were brought in to substantiate the, I believe you said 50,000 and an understatement?
Oh, no, it was substantially more than that.
For the recent.
Oh, for the recent?
50,000, right?
Prior.
The prior audit.
Oh, is it prior?
Yeah, for the prior audit, I believe, the
What
liability went from
Type
about-
of records were
Oh, type of records.
ultimately provided?
Yes, it was the monthly sales journal, and I believe the register tapes were provided during that time period when they had told us that they did not have, they had thrown those away.
Question of the proprietor. Why didn't you continue to keep those same records during this period?
Well, they did.
Sales journals?
It's their contention that the records that they presented are the same records that they always maintained, and that there isn't a distinction, that they didn't have a different procedure they followed, was it 15 years ago when the first audit was done, versus what they presented in this current audit.
How many employees did you have on the?
4,
4 employees? And how much did you pay them an hour, on average?
the minimum.
Thank you. Further discussion, members? Hearing none, is there a motion?
Move to take the matter under
Member
submission.
Stowe, moves to take the matter on submission, second by Member Runner. Without objection, members, such will be the order. Thank you so very much for appearing before us today. The board will take your matter under consideration later on this evening and send you a written report of our decision.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Good, I guess.
Members, let's take a 5-minute break.
Break time.
We can do it on record.
Thank you.
Members, let us reconvene the meeting of the Board of Equalization. Ms. Richmond, what's our next matter?
Our next matter is item C2, Wing Sang Inc. Please come forward.
Why am I all Ms. Sanjija, would you please introduce the issues in this case?
Mr. Chairman and members, the appeal before you presents one unresolved issue, which is whether adjustments are warranted to the measure of unreported taxable sales.
Thank you. Welcome to the Board of Equalization. Please be advised that you have 10 minutes to make your presentation, and we will return and allow you 5 minutes on rebuttal. Please commence with your introductions for the record.
Mark Brandeis, CPA representative for the taxpayer.
Mr. Brandeis, if you'd like, you can pull it forward.
Mark Brandeis, CPA representative for the taxpayer.
Thank you.
Greg Reynolds, CPA representative for the taxpayer.
Welcome.
Philip Bong, CPA, representing taxpayer.
My name is Bi Wong.
Still in our
At your convenience.
Okay, based upon the indirect audit approach used by the department, that is the credit card to total sales ratio method, which resulted in a 74.9% observed or audited credit card rate. We believe that that rate materially confirms that the taxpayer has properly reported their taxable measure over the audit period. The average rate reported and recorded by the taxpayer over the audit period is 78.72%. Therefore, the difference between the reported rate and the observed rate is 3.8%. Such an indirect audit method is an estimate. The results of the estimate materially confirm the amounts reported. We acknowledge that the audit manual does not properly outline the concept of materiality. In other words, it's largely left up to the judgment of the auditor. However, surely given the small difference noted, the department isn't suggesting that any difference, no matter how small, should result in a tax deficiency. Generally, the concept materiality should be interpreted in a more liberal approach when the test periods used are limited in size and scope. Here, the department has chosen a 2-day audit test period as a representative measure of the credit card ratio over a 3-year audit period. We submit to the board, the members of the board, that a 2-day audit approach is insufficient. In Field Audit Manual Section 0830.30, the audit manual suggests that several days should have been used for an observation test, including a weekday and a weekend. Here, the department used 2, and we interpret several to mean 3 or more. The auditors performed their first observation test on Saturday, 10/15/2011, which resulted in a 77.9% credit card ratio. It would have been entirely reasonable to accept that result and end the audits in accordance with cutoff techniques described in Audit Manual Section 0405.35. However, the department chose to perform a second-day test with an observation on Tuesday, 10/25/11, which resulted in a credit card ratio of 65.7%. However, the Tuesday sales, the sales volume level was 1/3 that of the Saturday result, resulting in an average observed credit card ratio of 74.9%. It is our opinion as both former board auditors and consultants that given that wide dispersion between the results of the 2 days, 65.7% versus almost 78%, given that wide dispersion, that they should have opted for additional days to test, where they didn't even meet the the policy set forth in the audit manual of several days. We calculated the credit card ratio on a quarter-by-quarter basis for the audit period in question using the taxpayers' recorded and reported amounts. Those ratios range from 70.9% to 83.4%. It should be noted that the credit card ratio in the prior audit was accepted at 80.86%, pursuant to the supplemental DNR dated April 24th, 2014, prepared by Mr. Ted Matthews, appeals auditor. In the prior audit period, the credit card ratio ranged from 79.8% to 86%. Further, in that supplemental DNR, Mr. Matthews concludes that the operations of the predecessor to the current owner are substantially similar for the purpose of comparison. We also submit that the credit card ratio is a dynamic ratio, not static. That is, the ratio is constantly changes. In fact, it changes every single day. In addition, the overall trend of the ratio will change based on changing factors in the marketplace, of which there were several here. First of all, over the audit period, but especially in the last year of the audit, there had been an influx of Chinese immigrants into the Walnut, Roland Heights, Puente Hills area. These immigrants tend to be families who statistically prefer to pay by cash for cultural and other reasons. Second, the Great Recession, which covers this period, had an extremely negative impact on the fast food establishments within the shopping center. Several of these fast food establishments tended to serve cash-paying customers. With the closure of several of these establishments, those cash-paying customers began to frequent the taxpayer's establishment. Point number 3, the observation tests were performed at the end of the audit period in fourth quarter 11, immediately preceding the close of the audit period, and during a time when the credit card ratio had been in decline since fourth quarter 2010.
We'd like to submit a couple other issues and contentions. The next contention we want to submit concerns Audit Manual Section 810.35, which talks about the requirement that a secondary test be utilized in establishing an indirect audit approach conclusion. We maintain that was not performed here, that there was only a singular method used, the credit card cash ratio. There was no secondary test to corroborate the validity of that particular test. Now, the department's going to probably argue that there was the performance of a markup, and they did analyze the resulting markup from the audit when they took the audited taxable sales and compared it back to cost of goods sold and compared that increase to what was originally on the income tax return calculations. But we contend that's not a markup analysis. There was no shelf test performed. There was no analysis of the individual cost of goods sold to what the items were sold for to come up with a corroborating document or procedure to demonstrate that the markup that they came up with in the resulting audit results was reasonable. Many times the department throws out this 200% markup. They say, oh, a restaurant has to be 200%. And we claim that that's no longer valid in many instances, and it's incumbent upon the department to do some kind of a shelf test to ascertain what the markup really should be, even if it's limited in nature. Not to just say, okay, well, the resulting markup is higher than it was originally, so we're going to go ahead and conclude that our analysis is correct. Still wasn't up to 200%. But what they did come up with, it was a markup that was higher. Now, the original reflected markups on the income tax returns were 118% and 96. Now, the 96 is low, but the 118% is very close to what was accepted in the prior audit. Now, we also noticed that the analysis of what went into cost of goods sold was not performed, especially for the 96% year, which again is not that low, but certainly not 118%. So we maintain that there may be other cost items that went in there, and it would be incumbent again upon the department to analyze that and ascertain whether or not there is something wrong, and is the 96% really not reflective because cost of goods sold may be overstated. Okay. So again, the auditor looked at an audited markup, but it's not really audited. It's just basically what resulted from their audit results. So no secondary test was performed. Another issue we wanted to look at was one reason why they did the test and did the audit, and rather than accepting what was there, is they found one undercover purchase back in January 9th of 2011, before the audit started. They did an undercover test. Now, normally we've seen in other audits we've been involved with, and we understand that what the board is doing multiple undercover buys. They just did one, and they found that cash sale was not reported. And we actually came up with an explanation that the person confessed to stealing that day, and we admit that there's going to be stealing in a business, in a cash business especially, but we don't believe in this situation as material, and we don't believe this one-day test in any way substantiates or proves that this is a material problem with this taxpayer. Now, we also wondered whether there might be other purchases that they did and didn't tell us about, and we have received no documentation about that. But normally there are multiple purchases, and so that would be in our interest, of course, if we were to able to ascertain if other tests had been done, and in those particular instances they were reported. So we ask if the department has other tests that they performed, if they would disclose those to us, because so far we haven't seen that. We've only seen the one. You want to add anything else? Okay, I guess that's the end of our presentation.
Members will now go to the department. The department has 10 minutes to make their presentation. We'd ask that they commence with they introduce themselves for the record and begin at their convenience.
Good morning, Chairman Horton and members. My name is Scott Lambert. I'll be representing the Sales and Use Tax Department. To my right is Kevin Hanks, and to Mr. Hanks' right is Stephen Smith, representing staff. In this particular case, the taxpayer operates a restaurant. There was a prior audit in this particular case, and an observation test was performed during that time period that came out to around 74% credit card. There was a problem with the observation test and the fact that the observation only covered one of 3 of the taxpayers' time periods where they sell. They have a lunch, a dinner, and a late night. Only the lunch time was observed, and that's where the approximately 74% credit card number came from. So ultimately, there's a lot more to that, but I'll just get to the end, which is ultimately the department used that observation test. The taxpayer provided their own records for the remaining parts of those observation periods, which was the dinner and the late night, and it came up to around 87% credit card for those time periods. Now, those were periods that the department had not observed the sales during that time, but nevertheless, the percentages from that period were added to the percentages from the actual observation of lunch, and the resulting credit card percentage was the nearly 81% credit card. So the department's argument in that case is that we're using, for at least a period of time, the taxpayer's own records to verify their records instead of us, the department, verifying the actual observation. So with that said, the department would agree with the taxpayer if the 80% was used. This would be a no change audit. Our arguments will be why we don't believe that the 80% is reasonable from the prior period, and that what they've reported, which is the 78.72%, we feel is or does not have all the cash sales. And there's basically a couple reasons. One is the markup of record when we originally looked at that is 118% for one year and 96% for the other years. Those are significantly low markups for a restaurant. Typically, it's almost a bright line with the restaurants. 100% of it's under 100% that there's going to be some kind of test on the department's part unless there's some kind of extenuating circumstances. In this case, it was 96%. We felt it should be higher, so that's why we did the observation. In addition to that, we had the cash purchase that the department had performed. Where in January of 2011, an auditor, I believe with their family, came out and had dim sum at the restaurant and was given a bill that they paid with cash. And I think the important part from the fact that we verified the cash sale did not show up in the cash register, even though we received, or on their reports, even though we received a receipt. If you look at the receipt, it's absent a lot of information. So somebody with authority over the POS system, which is a Profit Tech system that was there during the prior audit, they have taken off the date, the time, the server. There is a bill number that has been taken off. At the bottom, there's also what they'll have is the method of payment and the payment amount. That information has been taken off the receipt. So in order to do that, it's my understanding that you have to have someone with authority over the POS system in order to remove those fields from the receipt. And that's what's been done in this case. In the prior period, all that information, those fields that I mentioned, were on the receipts that the taxpayer provided us, and now they're not on it. And so what's that do? That causes a problem with internal controls in that you don't have the information on there. You don't know if it is your server, if it's the owner, or what the reason is why those sales are not showing up in your cash register. But there's no question that sale did not get put onto or didn't get recorded. Well, it was not, I have to be careful in terms of my description of it. I would say is the tape that they provided us did not have that sales on that register tape. So there's a substantial amount of liability. It's $675,000. That's quite a bit of money for an employee to take. Is it possible? It is possible that people were doing it. We don't have all the information as to how this was happening. The taxpayer did not give us the or access to the POS system, so we were not able to adequately determine how the sales were not being reported. In terms of the secondary test, the department did do a secondary test, and that was average sales day, and used the sales from that. The liability would have been higher based on that. And I also mentioned, the auditor had mentioned they had also done a tablecloth test, which turned out higher, and I don't recall looking at that, but that was an indication that they had performed that test, but they felt that the observation test was the best method of establishing this liability. In terms of other purchases, I'm aware of one of our auditors going out at another time, and I believe it was June of 2011, and I'm not sure what the results, whether they had paid cash or whether we checked to see if that purchase was on the system. But what I would say is at that time, our employee was told that there's a 30% minimum for using the credit cards. And that's another issue here, that the taxpayer there's information the taxpayer was requiring customers to pay cash for sales that were less than $30. So when we did that calculation originally, and we did not accept the credit card sales that were used in the test, in other words, we said, well, we're just going to consider any sale less than $30 to be a cash sale, the credit card percentage went down into the 70% range instead of the 74% or 74.9% that we're using here. And that rate is somewhat consistent with the last quarter of the audit period, which they reported, which was at the 70% range for credit card percentage, which was accepted. So that's another point that the department wants to make, is that on the taxpayers' own records for the last quarter of the audit period, they reported 70% credit cards, almost 30% cash for that time period, and that's after they were notified of audit, and they filed the return after the observation tests were being conducted. So, to wrap up, the taxpayer wants the department to accept the sales that have been reported, and the reason the department is not accepting those sales is the fact that the markup in the 2 years, the markup of record were low. Even when you take the markup, the audited markup, were still low for that period, and one of the years is 113%, which is substantially low for this type of business. And so for that reason, we wouldn't accept the recorded sales, and also the fact that during the undercover test, those sales don't show up on the taxpayer's record, and the fact that what the undercover test indicated is that the taxpayer has a problem with their internal controls, which can cause other cash sales not to be reported. And just one thing, a note I hadn't mentioned earlier, but the taxpayer does have a system set up where their credit cards transactions are not tied into the POS system, which makes it difficult for the two systems really to match up. You have to work to make sure that you have everything matched up. In other words, if on the POS system, if someone put in cash and you rung out at the end of the day and it was really a credit card, you could have a problem with trying to match up the drawer to the actual sales that took place. And I just want to point that out. So in conclusion, the department, one other thing, as far as the cash deposits that are made into the bank, they're made sporadically, and they some months they're not made at all, and they're generally made at the end of the month. And from what I could surmise from the bank statements, is there was only about $100,000 maybe a little over $100,000 in cash that was deposited into the bank. And even with the taxpayers' records, when they're saying 21% of my sales are cash, that would be over $2 million. So it's basically they've had $2 million in cash sales, even based on their own records, that were used for something else. So there's really no control over the cash sales. So with that, the department concurs with the Appeals Division decision and recommendation.
Thank you. On rebuttal, please.
First thing I'd like to address is the undercover cash purchase. Before I became a tax auditor with the state of California, I was an internal auditor for 2 different publicly traded corporations. I can tell you, with that experience, plus my experience, there's virtually no business that has significant numbers of employees handling cash that's not going to have some sort of employee theft issues with cash. It just is virtually impossible. That said, the board came in and did a single purchase. The secondary purchase that the department refers to in June 10th, 11th, we have no information about that. But I can tell you, both again, as my experience as a board auditor, I think Mr. Reynolds will testify to the same fact pattern, his experience as well. I've never heard of one single undercover purchase test. I mean, what type of sample would we call that? It's not a stat sample. It's not a block sample. We submit that the department isn't using that sample as a means of coming up with a tax deficiency, but at best we can call it an attribute sample. But an attribute sample based on a single purchase, I've never heard of such a thing. On the issue of the secondary method that the department refers to is average sales per day. I see no analysis of that. My opinion in looking at reviewing the audit is that there really is no secondary method done. We thought that the department would approach the point of view that the analysis, the markup was a secondary method. But again, we submit based on the comments in the audit working papers, based on the calculations shown to us in the audit working papers, there was no audit testing done on the markup itself. There's no shelf test done. There's no verification of cost of sales. All the department did was take the numbers off the federal income tax return and calculate the markup reported off the federal income tax returns. We think they're reasonable with the exception of maybe the fiscal year ending 2010. But the department made no attempt to verify cost of sales. They made no attempt to perform actual audit techniques on the market for that period. No shelf test, nothing. So that can't be considered a secondary approach. On the issue of the $30 minimum for credit card sales, we obtained from the department hundreds of pages of audit support documentation. In that, we obtained the merchant card statements for the period in question. Both Greg and myself reviewed that on this issue of the $30 minimum for credit card purchases. There was transaction after transaction under $30. The department is basing this assessment based on Yelp reviews. But yet the merchant card statements, which I think carry far more weight than any review you would read on Yelp, have been virtually ignored here.
A couple real quick things. The department stated that in order for the invoice to be changed, there would have to be apparently some kind of management or authority. We worked with the taxpayer. They showed us how they think this might have happened, where they were doubling up tickets, and they were able to demonstrate how a single server could do this on their own by keeping a ticket open, combining the two, falsifying one ticket, and then closing out the prior. So it could have been perpetrated by one individual with no management understanding. And it would have to be done very surreptitiously, so we don't believe it could be done very often, because it would have to be kind of done off to the side when they still have a couple tables open, and their managers walk the floor and watch what's going on. So we would think it's something that would happen very, very infrequently. Second of all, the department had said that the markups in the current audit were unreasonable, too low compared to the prior audit. Note that the prior audit that was accepted as a no change had the markups of 119, 120 for an overall of 125, 124 actually. And we're looking at 118 in 1 year. There's 96 in another year. We agree with that. But in those 2 years, the sales went up dramatically. In the 2009, they were 2.5 million. In 2008, they were 2.5. They went up to 4.3 in the next year. So they went up substantially, but cost of goods sold went up even greater. So our manifestation would be that probably there was something that went into cost of goods sold that was improperly booked in that, some overhead expense. The department made no investigation why that markup was low, probably because they didn't use that as a methodology for doing the audit. Okay. Now they want to come back after the fact and say that's part of the documentation used to support their overall conclusion. We also say that the test that they performed for the cash credit card was done at the end of the audit period. Okay. At that point in time, in that year, as Mr. Brandeis has said, the market sort of shifted and we had more cash purchasers come in. In the beginning of our audit period, we had cash credit card 81, 80, 81, 78, 83, 80, 82. Then it began to drop in 2010 down to 75. The second quarter, 2011, it was up to 79 again, and then in the last two quarters, it dropped to 76 and 70. So that's true, the last period was low. And that's the period they did the cash credit card analysis. So it would probably show a lower amount, because that period of time there were more cash purchases or cash sales. Certainly not reflective of what happened on the other 11 quarters of the audit period. Taxpayer also made or the department also made the claim that the undercover purchase was done, and then they were informed when the audit was going to be done, and then they reported a lower period quarterly sales amount, which we don't believe that was the case. What day did the audit start? Do you remember?
I don't recall. The actual fieldwork testing?
Yeah.
I don't recall.
Well, they did the undercover test back in January, and that return was filed, that first quarter was filed at 79% cash credit card ratio, which was right in line with what the prior period audit had, and what they had reported in a percentage all the way back pretty much through the beginning of the audit period for the about 9 or 10 prior quarters. So we don't believe that truly is a conclusion that is valid, that the taxpayer decided to report properly on the last return, and that the true amount of taxable, cash to credit card was 3070 for the entire audit period. So again, we maintain that the cash ratio should have been about 80%, as it was in the prior audit and as it was reported through almost the entire audit period.
I would like to point out one other issue. The last quarter of the audit, the department would have resulted in a credit in the audit. The department zeroed that out. So basically what we're looking at here is based on their observation test, based on the ratio used. If it results in a deficiency, we'll go ahead and pick that up. If it results in a credit, we'll zero that out. It's inconsistent with the board's policy to treat credits in an equal fashion to proposed underpayments. We're not suggesting that that be the remedy in this matter, but we do note that there seems to be this preference when there's an underpayment to pick it up, but when there's a net credit, we zero it out. We don't think that's fair treatment, and we think there's plenty of guidance in the audit manual that would suggest that is not fair treatment.
Members, for clarification, I believe it's important that the department address that specific issue. I would concur with the taxpayer that if there is a credit, the adjustment should have been made and appropriate. At the same time, clarify the various different testing methods that were used, the observation tests, and then the use of the records and combining the observation test, the tablecloth test, and the average sales test, as to what are those? I mean, describe what the test entails.
Mr. Horton, generally, as you know, the department does allow for credits and audits that we're handling. When we do find that taxpayers have over-reported amounts, we certainly are amenable to scheduling that in our audits. We offer that every time that we see it. In this case, what we didn't do is schedule the credit as an offset, because we assume that the taxpayers reporting for that quarter was more accurate. Their recorded amounts were more accurate than what they had reported previously. The numbers that we're using to establish the ratio of credit card sales is just used as a measure and a conservative calculation of what we're assuming the ratio of credit card sales to cash sales were. I think the real difficulty in the core of this case is, by virtue of our using the credit card ratio method to establish what credit card sales, what we're basically trying to do is to account for cash sales, because the taxpayer has admitted that they've had more than $2 million in cash sales for the 11 quarters that they were under audit. $2 million. When we look at the bank statements, we see $100,000 in cash sales being deposited. Typically, in fact, there were 19 months where no cash deposits were made whatsoever for any of those months. In most of the other months, what we find is that there's one cash deposit made at the end of the month, just a single deposit. As I say, we're trying to account for the cash sales. There are very limited controls, internal controls even, that's used by the business to track those cash sales. So at the core of this case is our attempting to determine what those cash sales were. And the fact that they're not depositing those cash receipts into the bank account makes it very difficult for the auditor to try and determine the valuation of those cash sales, which is why we're using the credit card ratio method to impute what those cash deposits should have been. Moreover, when we do look at the cash deposits that were made, we see that they're made in whole dollar numbers, $400, $5,000, single amounts, so it's not representative of what we'd expect to see based on our knowledge that there are at least $2 million in cash receipts for this 11-quarter period. So we're looking for approximately $182,000 in cash deposits per month. We're seeing $100,000 total for this entire time period. And that's really the core of our difficulty with the case.
Description of testing methods.
Yeah, I asked the auditor about that, and I was not able to find the other testing methods in the audit working papers, and I think the reason is because they weren't used. In hindsight, I think we should have included it in there and said this is another method, but we didn't use it. It's easy to go back and take the observation, what the sales were on there, and take an average sales day and multiply it out. That's not difficult to do. You can do those numbers and find out that it's going to come up with more than 11.8 million that they reported. So that's another method of doing it, and that comes up with a higher number. We don't feel that's as accurate as using the credit card method that we're using.
Mr. Horton, if I could add just one other comment. One of the other issues that the auditor faced in completing this assignment was gaining access to the POS information that the taxpayer has within their accounting records. I think all of these issues, all these questions that the auditor had could have been resolved at the very beginning if we'd been given access to those accounting detail within the POS computer. But the taxpayer, for whatever reason, would not provide that information to the audit staff. But it's really the POS computer that is the repository of information regarding all the sales, credit card, cash, or whatever, generated by the business. Had we been given access to that information, boom, we could have looked at those numbers and compared that to reported amounts and known exactly what level of sales the taxpayer was making. In this case, as I say, for whatever reason, they would not allow us to have access to their accounting data, electronic accounting data.
I'm observing and acknowledging that the taxpayer wants to respond to that, but I'm going to go to the member and who I believe will allow that opportunity. Member Ma.
I just have a couple of questions. You talk about the undercover sale on January 9th, 2011. Do you have a copy of the receipt?
I do. It's here.
Yeah, can you send it up? I just want to take a look at it. And then you talked about another undercover buy in July or in June of 2011.
Yes.
But you said it wasn't in the working papers.
I did not have a copy of that. I have a written description of that, and I believe it was just put in there for the purpose of documenting the $30 minimum for credit cards. But I have in here somewhere, I have a copy of the report that I can provide you if you like.
No, I was just wondering if you have another copy like
no,
this.
I do not.
So just looking at this, what you were saying is that there's no date, there's no time, there's no employee,
Right, there's no server.
no server,
Uh-huh.
and that's usually items that are found on a,
Yes. Yeah, there's also a bill number that will show up on there. And then at the bottom, you'll have, it'll say credit card or cash. And then if you pay in cash, then it'll have like the amount and the change that you're getting back. And that doesn't, none of that is on there, but we do have that information previous to this. So it was on the tapes, or it was on the receipts in 2008. We know that for sure. And then somewhere between 2008 and that date, it's not on there anymore. So our understanding is that someone with authority over the POS system has to be able to get in there to change that. And we don't know who did it. We don't know who has authority. We don't know who did it. But it's obvious it was done. So
maybe to the taxpayers' representatives, what changed in the receipt?
I'm not an expert on the POS system used. I'm going to defer the questions on the POS system to Mr. Tong. He is the CPA for the taxpayer.
The receipt that you're looking at is the actual stamp card for dim sum, and it's typical of the dim sum restaurant that this is pre-printed ticket and individual item that you take or consume to be stamped on, and clearly there is no information that what the board was looking for.
Can you give him what you just showed me?
Yeah. I'm looking at from the left corner, this is the dim sum ticket that the print in. This was given once a print out. A customer wanted his order print out to show customers what items they order on the ticket itself. But the details are on the actual cash, the final ticket for credit card payments purposes. So that's why when you look at it, and that's an issue that you don't have it. You don't have those information there. But because it's not complete, it's not executed, it's not signed and paid yet. Okay, once it's paid, then the information reflected in the final registered tape there. Yes.
So are you saying that that is not the final receipt that a customer would receive?
No, this is an open ticket. This is an open ticket.
That's an open ticket.
Correct.
Okay, so to the department, if that's what you're giving as evidence, is that an open ticket, or is that the final receipt that your auditor received during that buy?
This is the only receipt that the auditor received. This is all they received. There wasn't anything else. This is it. So this was a cash purchase. It wasn't a credit card purchase. It was cash that was paid.
But if it was a credit card purchase, would it be a different looking receipt?
I don't believe it. I don't believe it would. There would be, you have to sign. There's when you go to the restaurant, they'll give you a portion that you sign, and you would get that. But I believe you're going to get the same thing.
Okay, so to the CPA. So the taxpayer or the customer paid cash, and that's all he got. Would he have gotten another
It's an open ticket,
receipt?
and if it's an actual receipt, they'll print out the receipts. The actual receipt will print out with all the detail. And if it's paid by credit card, the receipts and the credit card ticket to be signed will be given to the customer. A lot of time you pay cash, it's open, it's done, and move on. If the customer doesn't ask for a receipt, the receipt is not printed out. May I also address the issues earlier? During the audit, this is a lengthy audit, we provided complete access of the POS data. The auditor has all those years to examine. We provide every single Z tape, all reconciled to the point. A comment made earlier by the board that this credit card does not tie to the POS system. That's completely incorrect. We have the bank reconciliations that tie to the Z tape to the credit card reports. There's an annual credit card statements that tied to the report. And we've done the complete analysis and provided to the board auditor. And in reference to cash, the certain nature of the purchases has to be made in cash. Management does not run to the bank every day and make the deposit, but rather use the cash to do purchases. There are small farms that bring in produce, the fishermen and so forth. Those were used. It's not disappear from the book. Cash were used to do purchases. Accounting journals were reflected for all those purchases. They did not disappear off the book. In reference to markup, we have provided plenty of evidence to support that this is not a typical restaurant. You're looking for 120, 150% markup. This is a dim sum which sells for over $1 per tray, and they're all the same price for dim sum tray. And most importantly, specifically to this restaurant, that the margin is so low, we provide to the auditor the promotions. It's 99 cents a pound for lobster. And you pay for $40, they give you away a shrimp, a dozen free shrimp. There's a lot of promotions that's done. Sales have gone from $2 million to over $6 million. That's how the sales been generated. Certainly the drop, huge drop in margin there. But that's, the competition is so tough in the Chinese community where the seafood is served. Cost is very, very high. Thank you.
Could I address the issue on the cash deposits also? Another thing to point out in the restaurant business, credit card tips are generally, in fact, when I say generally, they're always paid out in cash receipts from the day. So not all the cash is going to make its way to the bank every day. It's just not done in the restaurant business. Further, there's no requirement to deposit cash on a timely basis. There's no board requirement. There's no requirement whatsoever to deposit any cash. And the board chose, based for their reasons for impeaching records, the board chose, we don't disagree. The risk of control here is not the credit card sales. The credit card sales are easily verified through 1099-K amounts, through merchant card statements, and through bank deposit analysis. Credit card sales have to go into the bank. Plus, the merchant card processors report on the restaurants through the 1099-K system. The question here is not no dispute. The question here is not the credit card sales. It's the cash sales. And the board has chosen as their audit methodology to analyze the credit card deposits and to infer, based on an observation test, what the likely cash sales would have been. Based on the analysis that we did, the department continually refers to at least $2 million in cash sales. Based on the reported amounts, based on the credit card deposits and the reported credit card ratio, cash sales would have had to been at least $2.5 million, which is the analysis that we've done and we provided in our submittal to you this morning. So even in our own analysis, we agree there's over $2 million in cash sales, and that is reflected in the reported amounts.
Exactly. You reported 2.5.
One other thing, the
Vaughn.
department continuously asserts that they've done a secondary approach, and our position is that we haven't seen any. It's not documented in the audit working papers. We don't see a secondary approach. We did see reference to a tablecloth method approach, and our notes suggest that the auditor abandoned that. I suspect that they've abandoned these approaches because it doesn't support their findings. It doesn't support what they want to assert. And they should have still documented, though, even though they weren't used in the audit, they should have still documented that approach, documented the methodologies used in those tests, and they should have provided it to us under the California Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
So to the department, their chart shows $9,300,000 in credit card sales, cash of $2.5 million, and your statement before was that you don't know what happened to $2 million worth of cash, but they reported 2.5.
They did, but our comment was in regards to the money going into the bank. There was $100,000 that went into the bank during for the majority of the audit period, and there were most months where there wasn't. So there's no question they reported $2.5 million in cash sales. There's no question about that. The question is what control is there over the cash? In other words, that cash, whether you say this is everything that they had, it did not get into the bank. It didn't get into the bank, and what we suspect is when you do not have controls over your sales, that you don't know who's taking what money. And that's our whole point from this, is that when you look at the markup, the low markup, and you look at the fact that our sale doesn't show up in your records, that there's a problem with the cash, whether someone took that money or the owner took the money. We can't say that, but it appears that there's a weak internal control of cash and that we can't follow the money.
Could we respond to that?
So, that's the nature of cash businesses. I mean, people that do business in cash don't always go to the bank every day and deposit cash in the bank. So, I mean, I don't really have a problem with, whether the $2.5 million can be traced directly to a bank account, because that is just not reality. And that's why, of course, we prefer to have everyone pay by credit card, because it's easier for us to do our job, but that's just not reality. So I don't understand. So because you can't trace the $2.5 million, you don't believe that you believe that they made more than 2.5 in cash.
That's right. And let's say this was just a franchise business, or someone's managing the business that is not directly an owner in it. In other words, there have to be controls over it. What you would find is that they would make the sales, they'd keep the daily sales sheets, and then that money would go into the bank account. What we're saying in this particular case is that cash is being spent for various reasons, and that based on, and in and of itself, that you're right, that's not a problem. This is, I think the main point is that there's a substantial amount of cash, and that cash is being used, and that the fact that this $675,000 can be cash that can be used to purchase things that wouldn't go into the bank, and so it's difficult for us to use a bank account to verify the sales that were being made. I don't know.
So you're just assuming that there's some portion that was not deposited that were cash sales, and you're just trying to figure out what portion that is.
Yeah, basically.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. That's it. There's no way for us to verify what those cash sales were based on the cash payouts and based on our examination of the bank deposits. So we're just trying to verify whether the $2.5 million that was reported was accurate. A secondary test that we can do to verify that is to use that credit card ratio method to determine what that portion of credit cards sales is to cash sales. So that's what the audit staff has done. And in that analysis, that indicates that there's an apparent underreporting measured by $675,000.
Can I respond real quick? Yeah, I just want to just asking if you're an auditor and you go out there, so would you have assumed if it was 2.5 in cash that you would see a cash register, ledger that says, everything ties to 2.5 million, and you used all the 2.5 million for paying vendors or paying the rent or paying tips or employees? I mean, would you have wanted to see that as an auditor so that everything ticked and tied with receipts to the whole $2.5 million to be able to say, yeah, we're satisfied that they accounted for all the cash?
Well, I think we wanted to see the electronic records to verify that the sales are being made. When you have a transaction like this that ends up not being in the records, it indicates that there could be a problem, and especially with the low markup. So, what we want to do is, okay, put our minds at ease. Let's look at the electronic data and then find out, oh yeah, these sales are showing up, or you could see where it's being, taken out of the system. It would give us a better means of determining whether the sales that were being run through the POS system were accurate.
Can I make a quick response to that?
Member Runner.
Yeah, a couple of things. Remind me a little bit what was going on with this $30 issue, and
Right.
how that affected then our estimates, or what that did. What did we do when we saw? Well, how did we get the idea that there was a $30 threshold for credit card?
Right. Well, we had looked on the, there was a couple different ways of doing it. One of them is we looked at the Yelp comments.
Right.
And if you, starts at July 11th of '09, at least as far as we could go
Are
back.
you going to read me Yelp comments?
I'll spare you, I guess, but.
Yeah, you don't need. I'll take your word for it. That's what they say.
Okay.
So we
but
saw
there's-
Yelp comments. Anything else?
Yeah, and our auditor was out there.
Okay.
And, well, I should say, a BOE employee was out there, and that they were told, and it was in writing, that said there's a $30 minimum.
And it was
for
in writing of what, on the menu, on the,
You know,
where was that?
That I'm not certain exactly where it was written. But the next comment I'll make is the corporate officer said that in fact that he was doing that. So there was no denial that that was going on. I think maybe in
During our observation, what did we see?
we saw during the observation that employee or customers were able to use credit cards for any purchase, whether it was over or
So
under
that
30.
how does that then?
So
how do
what
we
we
use
did,
that then?
well, yeah, that was our observation test.
Right,
And
right.
so our feeling is that was not taking place during the entire time. And so we came up with a 70% credit card percentage.
Okay, so hold on. Let me see if I understand this then. We, during our official observation time, which we
Yeah.
judged the practices of the business,
Right,
we observed that they're taking credit cards for less than $30.
yes,
During this informal visit by some BOE member,
yes.
no, or BOE staff
Staff.
member, that is not related to the audit, somewhere they read that they weren't doing, but during our official visit, they were.
Absolutely.
So we conclude that,
Well, I'll go on because I'll get you the answer.
Okay.
And I'll give you the whole story. So originally we said, okay, well, you accepted it then, but you weren't doing it during the whole
Right,
audit period.
right.
We're not going to allow those credit card transactions under $30 as credit card. We're going to consider that cash. And the percentage came out to a little over 70%.
Right.
The taxpayer argued, and they provided us 3 months of credit card statements that showed that they were, in 2011, showed that they were accepting, or they were accepting sales that were under $30 with credit cards. And so the department said, okay, we'll allow all of them under $30
Okay.
for the entire audit
Okay, good,
period.
okay.
And to come up with 74%. But
Okay.
what I'm saying is that that's to their benefit.
Right.
But there's plenty of evidence, in fact, the owner saying that.
okay, so
that-
so at that point, so in the actual audit, what we did, we go ahead and we gave them credit for the $30.
Correct.
Okay, fine. I just want to get through how that impacted and what there was.
Right.
Let me just ask, in regards to the error ratio. They got an error ratio of what, 6.4%. If this was a bar, what would we do with an error ratio of 6.4%?
Well, that's a hypothetical.
But if this was a bar, what would we do with that?
And that's a little bit a different scenario types of, but if it was a bar, it would be treated differently than this. And there is a 10% minimum for various things, different size pours.
We would not see a liability, correct?
If it was on a beer bar, you would see a liability.
Okay.
It would be on where you're pouring.
Where you're pouring, there, we'd
where
not
you're
see a
pouring
liability.
drinks because of the variations in waste spillage things of that
Okay.
nature.
What do we have any similar issue like with different kinds of restaurants that might do the business might be a little bit different? Where we'd say, hey, this is pretty marginal, again, I'm trying to think, this is on top of what, $11 million, $675,000. We're arguing over cash, where the cash went, where the cash was there. Is there any, when is it that we feel like, at terms of a restaurant like this, when we might be close enough?
Close enough. I think you have to take a look at all the different factors in here, and some of it. The main factors are the low markup.
So you'd say that basically we as a board just need to decide if this is close enough. Really?
I would say you have to take a look at all the different factors, and we have the same concerns that you do, I believe.
Okay, so let me look at this factor then. Basically, if we went ahead and adjusted the credit card ratio to what, 3.4%, there would be no liability, correct?
It would be 3.4 points, but it's
3.8. Okay,
it's a different.
Approximately. We'll get there.
Well, you'd have.
Yeah.
I think a little bit misleading using the 3.4, but because I think you would have. Well, that's points, but it's not percentage of. You have to take 3.4 of the 70.
I said points, didn't I?
Oh,
I didn't say
thought I heard percentage, but
I said points, didn't I? I think.
Okay. 3.4 points.
Yeah, going from 70 whatever to 78, right?
That's right,
Okay,
but you
right.
still end up with a under 100% markup
Yeah.
and you still have cash sales that aren't being rung up. That's
Right.
That's our
Here's
main
where my
problem.
challenge is with this, and this is where I guess I get to a point of reasonableness, and that is, again, we are all doing estimates here. We are estimating, they are estimating, we are estimating, and we're trying to come up with a number. And we're doing an estimate on a really big number, which then makes the liability pretty big. Which I guess is part of the concern. I am not concerned at all on the current. The cash issue is not an issue for me. I know enough people in the restaurant business in regards to how they have to deal with tips, how they have to deal, particularly again, depending on the business. I know some businesses that supply and pay a lot depending upon what kind of restaurant they are and how they pay their suppliers and their fresh food and all who's bringing it in. You pay a lot of cash out. And again, I don't know what you do with tips. I didn't hear. When you pay tips in the credit card, do you pay that tip out then with cash at the end of the day?
Correct.
Okay, so you got a credit card that has a tip on it, and then you actually go into your cash drawer and actually pay that out.
That's correct.
Okay. So to me, I think this is all about, for me at least, reasonable. Is it, in a business like this, is this reasonable in the sense of I guess, clearly, just as we kind of do with bars, because some things are difficult, is it close enough? And I guess that's the challenge that I have as I'm looking at this case. Let me ask some real quick policy issues, not policy issues, but process issues on the observation tests. What would have motivated an observation test on this restaurant?
What motivated it?
Yeah.
The low markup, the fact that we
I'm
had.
sorry, I didn't mean the observation. I'm sorry. The undercover buy. I apologize. What would have motivated the undercover buy in this restaurant?
A lot of times auditors will just go out and kind of observe businesses before they audit them.
So this undercover buy was related to the fact that they were going to be audited?
Well, I think it was, they had problems before with this particular audit, and I don't know whether.
Hold on, what? I thought they had a no change audit.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I would say it ultimately ended up being a no change audit.
Well, okay. That's a good thing, isn't it, for a taxpayer?
Absolutely.
Right.
It was a good thing for them, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we wouldn't say, you got a no change audit, but you lucked out, so now we're going to try to get you again?
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's not what you're saying.
No, that's
Okay,
not what I'm saying.
So the idea was that they went through this, they had a no change audit, and
Uh-huh.
and so then an undercover buy was done. Now, again, I'm trying to see, this undercover buy wasn't related to the fact there was an upcoming audit? Or
Yeah, I
was
think
it?
sometimes auditors will just go out and they'll go to places and then something will trigger them to write it down. And so in other words, when they got this receipt and they show that there's no date, there's no time.
We have policies that tell auditors just go out randomly and buy
No.
stuff and check
You
it out?
know, citizens can do it too.
Well, citizens are a whole lot different than the government going into your business.
Well, they're not getting paid. The auditor is not getting paid for this purchase.
So this
is
was
something.
an unofficial undercover buy?
That's right.
Okay, so this was not a planned undercover buy. This was a citizen's undercover buy who happened to be a BOE employee.
That's right.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Member Harkey.
Hi, I'm going to make this real short. I think we've beat this up pretty well, and I've heard a lot of good comments and a lot of explanations for things that I was questioning. But I think basically what we're doing here is discussing a 74.9 versus a 78.72 on a credit card. So that's the whole issue. Everything else really doesn't matter. If we had come up with if we had come up with a ratio for the department of higher than the taxpayer, what would we have done with that?
Well, that's a hypothetical question.
Right, do we give money back on that, or?
Well, no, it normally doesn't work that way.
Okay.
And the reason is because people generally, if they're reporting from their records, they don't have phantom sales. And so they're just reporting sales that are in their records. So the fact that maybe, there's some variances in a markup or credit card percentage, you wouldn't necessarily adjust for that because they do have the backup to support the sales that they did report. So there's no question that those sales actually took place. The question is whether you have cash sales that took place that were not recorded in the cash register, or at least not reflected in the cash register. And I think in this particular case, had the taxpayer provided us access to the electronic records, it could have relieved our ability to audit that. And the fact that they gave us printouts from the register or from the POS system is different than providing us access to the POS system.
Okay, I understand that, but the petitioner provided financial statements, general ledgers, bank statements, credit card, merchant statement, purchase invoice, sales reports with cash register Z-tapes for some months, and what's an FITR?
Federal income tax return.
There you go. So I think that's pretty complete. I thought it was. And so I think basically what we're talking about is a 3.8% estimate. And I just have a problem saying that, 74.9 is better than 78.72, but if we'd have said that it was 80%, then we would have not allowed you that. So.
Ms. Harkey, actually,
Sure.
there's an alternative way that this could have been viewed. Typically, the audit staff isn't going to allow credit if there's in this last quarter, for instance. That could be an alternative view that the members could look at in determining whether or not that adjustment should have been made. Certainly, if taxpayers, let's say taxpayers reported to us 100% of their credit card sales or 120% of their credit card sales and over-reported their sales tax obligation to the board, they can certainly contact us through a claim for refund process, establish to us what those taxable sales were, and we're happy to refund those amounts, and we do that all the time in our audit determination refund section. So we see those types of claims, so we do process them all the time. If the taxpayer could establish to us that they had over-reported in that last quarter of the audit period, certainly would be amenable to making that adjustment. Here, we're just using a conservative estimate of 74% credit card sales to derive what audited gross sales should have been, total sales should have been, and did the math and comparing that to reported amounts to establish the difference. But certainly another way of looking at it could have been to allow that credit in the last quarter, subtract that from what was calculated.
Thank you.
further discussion, members? Member Stowell.
I'll be quick. I have two questions. One for the department. Do you have the receipt from the prior audit?
We have a.
Does it look like this one that we have before us?
I have a printout of sales for.
Was it for dim sum or was it for something else?
Yes, something else.
Okay, that's good, so.
Yeah, it has the date, time, server, bill number, credit card, and it's broken down at the bottom. It has food, liquor, and beverage sales.
Okay.
And the time the ticket was open.
But it's a credit
Date
card.
and time.
Okay. Okay, great. That's wanted to clarify on that. To the petitioner, I'm not going to ask about the receipt. You did say something about, one of the things the department said why they did go further and do the observation test because the markup was substantially lower than what you expected. What did you say about your business practices and your competition and so forth?
It is in the industry specific to the Chinese seafood restaurant. You see markup as low as below 100 because of the competition. A good example, and we have given to the auditor, approve of the promotions, posters, and flyers. We charge 99 cents per pound for lobster. It costs us $2.50. Okay, we're giving away free shrimp for a certain amount to order, $40, if I recall, for the year in order to promote sales and bring in clients. And so there was no test done, shelf test done to determine that our markup is incorrect. And this is reflected the true number of what the actual purchase is.
So also you have a low markup, but you have more volume?
Yes, the sales almost went up threefolds.
To the department, do you guys take that into consideration when you're looking at a business markup? Do you factor in volume and the type of business? Does that make a difference? To maybe you don't have to look any further as far as the records are concerned?
Sure, you would look at different types of businesses because different types of businesses have different markups. And I'll say generally, and I can't recall any that I've seen of sit-down restaurants that have a markup of less than 100%. That's kind of like the bright line of the industry. I would say, my understanding is, and there were various prices on the dim sum, but I believe for the majority of the audit period, it was $1.99 per plate. And generally, the costs that go into that is you're still going to have over 100% markup. So to answer your question, yes, we do take volume and amounts into consideration. In this case, we still believe that the markup should be more than 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion, members? Hearing none, is there a motion? Moved by Member Harkey, take the matter under submission, second by Member Stowell. Without objection, members, such should be the order. Ms. Richmond?
That it?
Next are those items that have been taken under submission.
Okay, let's see.
Well, we don't have too many to take care of.
Yeah, we just got the one that we just did.
Would you like to take up item C2 first, or the order that we heard them?
That's right. It was C5, wasn't it? Yeah.
What are we doing?
Let's take it up in the order in which we heard them. C5.
So our first item is C5, James Paul Flores and Lydia Pimentel Flores.
I'm going to try a motion here. I'm going to support staff recommendation, excepting I would like to eliminate the penalty for fraud.
Member Harkey moves to adopt staff recommendation with the exclusion of the fraud penalty.
Can I ask a question
Mr. Anjija?
real quick? I may get close to there, but is there the issue of how about What's the difference between that and negligence penalty in this case?
In terms of the amount,
Yeah.
well, 25% fraud penalty, 10% negligence penalty. I don't have those numbers.
Okay, I don't need the exact amount, I'm just percentages.
25% is the fraud penalty, 10% for negligence.
Okay. I would do no negligence. I mean, no fraud, but negligence.
Okay, let me amend my motion because it makes sense to me. I would like to support the staff recommendation, removing the fraud penalty of 25% and attaching a negligence penalty of 10%.
Member Harkey moves to adopt staff recommendation and adjustment with the elimination of the fraud penalty and the application of a negligence penalty, second by Member Runner. Members, can we take the issue of the penalty up? I think that may be an easier issue. Objection?
Objection.
Noted. Members, we're going to take up the issue of whether or not a fraud penalty applies,
I have a question.
Question,
Clarification.
Member Stower of.
Regarding to the penalties. Any clarification to the appeals? Can you clarify to me what are the badges of fraud, and did the department in their testimony address any of these badges?
We did, and the substantial amount of understatement is one of the factors that we've got, failure to provide the books and records. I believe there was a prior audit where they also failed to provide those Z-tapes, and that was also resulted in the imposition of a fraud penalty. So we've got repeated errors from a prior audit to this period, which was fraud in the prior, so that usually is consistent with fraud in the current period. So we find that there's knowledge that they knew or should have known of the reporting obligations. Error ratio was 201.45%. That's what we've got.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for
Member
Bill.
Harkey.
Do you have any idea what the difference is in a bankruptcy scenario if you have a fraud penalty versus a negligence?
Yes, and and I'm not a bankruptcy expert, but generally in a fraud, when there is fraud present, that's usually a non-dischargeable debt. In this case, this debt is still non-dischargeable because it's not yet assessed for bankruptcy purposes. So the presence of fraud doesn't change the bankruptcy outcome for our purposes.
Right, but okay.
Can we clarify?
Can you say it again? In a different way.
If a debtor's, this is kind of redundant, if a debtor's debt were to be proven to be the result of fraud, which I believe they would try to contest it, you'd have an adversary action in the bankruptcy court, but if the bankruptcy court determined that a debt was due to fraud, it's non-dischargeable when they get a bankruptcy discharge. In this case, it's non-dischargeable no matter what because it's not yet assessed. They have a petition which is not yet final. So the bankruptcy was already filed. It would clear dischargeable debts from prior to filing bankruptcy. In this case, it's not yet assessed. So the bankruptcy discharge, if they get one, isn't, and it's a reorganization, by the way, but the bankruptcy discharge would not affect this debt because it's not yet assessed.
So it really makes no difference?
Right.
Okay.
And in this case, you said it's a reorganization, so what, the taxpayers are reorganizing, is their restaurant still open?
They closed March of 2015.
So-
But the debts, Chapter 13 for individuals is like a Chapter 11 for corporations, based on my limited research. The debts pre-petition have to be paid off within 3 to 5 years. This one is pre-petition and would not be dischargeable because it's not yet assessed. I don't know. The bankruptcy payment would be less than 100% depending on the amounts that they've got. So this one would not be discharged.
So there's no real difference in our opinion, whether it's negligence or penalty, just the amount, whether it's 25 or 10%.
Right. And ideally, the trier of fact is deciding whether there was fraud or whether there was negligence, not necessarily trying to drive the bankruptcy determination.
Let me make this real simple. I'll withdraw my motion and support the department since there's no difference in the bankruptcy scenario.
That's my understanding, is that it doesn't change.
Yeah, because that was my concern.
Except to the extent that if this board reduces the amount that's due, obviously it reduces the amount they need to pay
Yeah,
in
but-
bankruptcy.
Change our position in bankruptcy.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine with the department's recommendation. I should
Second.
have asked that question first, probably.
Member Harkey withdraws the motions and submits a motion to adopt staff recommendation, second by Member Stowar. Further discussion, members? Objection? Hearing none. Such will be the order.
Our next matter is C2 Wing Sang Inc.
Member Harkey?
I am moved to grant the petition of the taxpayer.
Second.
Point of clarification, there is a conceded amount of tax that was due of $6,263.91 based on a measure of 65,173 for the unreported cost of purchases of capital assets. And that's
Okay.
reflected in the summary. So I just want to clarify, you're granting, but not as to that portion, which is
Yeah,
conceded.
not as to that portion.
Thank you.
Whatever's been
Yes,
conceded.
Second.
Member Harkey moves to grant with the exception of the amount previously conceded by the business owner, second by Member Stowar. Without objection, such would be the order. Members, I thoroughly agree with the board's decision, but I'll just discuss it offline with staff.
We do have the matter submitted, Joanne?
And our last item is item C6, Sri Rashad Corporation. This is a waived appearance.
Oh, waived appearance. Which number was that? See what?
C6.
Move stack recommendation.
Second.
Right.
They
So-
fall within that category, it's good to go.
It's good. That's right.
We just moved staff recommendation on C6.
I seconded.
Let's see, six.
C6 was a
C6?
waived appearance.
Waived appearance.
That's our last item.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I was conferring with the member on item C6. Mr. Runner moves staff recommendation on item C6, second by Member Stowar. Without objection, members, such will be the order. Thank you very much, Mr. Runner. The meeting of the Board of Equalization is hereby adjourned. Thank you, members, until we meet again.